Hello there. You're listening to 10 Questions, where we discuss the wet plate collodion process and the photographers that create these unique images known as ambrotypes and tintypes. I'm your host, Chad Shryock, wet plate photographer for Pork Pie Photography based in Fort Collins, Colorado. In each episode, I've asked a modern-day practitioner to sit down with me and talk about how they got involved with this vintage process, share some information on their gear and studio, and provide some valuable insights into their creative process. So whether you're just beginning to dabble your toes in the collodion ethers, or you're a seasoned silverbath expert, hang on and see what develops with 10 questions. In this episode, I'm sitting down with another well-known veteran of the process who has been shooting collodion for more than 20 years and sharing the process via workshops and his well-known and published instructional guides. Spending 5 years traveling around Europe and teaching the process to budding wet platers, he's been able to make a name for himself in the wet plate world that, unless you're completely new to the practice, you're very familiar with both his name and hopefully some of his work. Based near Cripple Creek, Colorado, I'd like to welcome Quinn Jacobson to 10 Questions. Hey, Quinn, thanks for joining the show.
Hey, thank you, Chad. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, no, I really do appreciate you being on the podcast and kind of sharing what you've been up to lately.
My pleasure.
Yeah, you're another one of those Colorado mountain wet plate photographers that I've not had the chance to meet with face to face. So hopefully we'll make that happen sometime.
Yeah.
So just to talk a little bit about yourself, you come from a family of photographers, right?
Yeah, lay photographers. Both my parents were what I'd call consumer shutterbugs, but yeah, that we had photography was always a staple in our house. So it wasn't anything I was not familiar with, and a lot of people say they started, they got their first camera at 6 years old. I didn't. I mean, I was shooting Polaroids and 8 millimeter film and stuff when I was young, but you do it for fun and interest. There's nothing super serious about it. So,
Sure.
but yeah, I had a lot of no pun exposure to photography as a young person for sure.
Yeah. Did you choose to be a photographer, or do you feel like it was something that was pushed on you from an early age?
No, it was definitely a choice. I grew up in a blue collar home. I was the first person really in my immediate family to get higher education and all that kind of stuff. So no, it was. I come from a blue collar family of welders and union people and hardworking folks like that. So it wasn't anything art and while it was appreciated and photography was appreciated, but it was never thought of as something you could do as a career.
Yeah. Did you go straight into school, or I think I read that maybe you spent some time in the military?
Yeah, I was one of the victims of an early recession in 1980, 81. Reagan came into office and things started going downhill. I was working in high school. I was working in a fab shop and a grinding pipe and stuff like that. And I was going to try to be an apprentice and then become a journeyman welder. And the union started having problems. The economy shifted, and I ended up coming out of high school, going directly into the military. I signed up for the military when I was 17 and entered when I was 18. So I did 3 years as a combat infantryman. I was on a mortar crew. I was a gunner on a mortar crew for 3 years, and I had 3 additional years to do. And they allowed me to change my MOS or military occupational skill, what I did in the military, to what's called an 84 Bravo at the time. It was a combat photographer. So I
Yeah.
got I got started 3 years in the military in my early 20s. And I came out of the military and went directly into undergraduate school for photography. So the military really shaped. Uh, I understood that I could do. It was a commercial, of course, right? It was the military wasn't commercial, but I understood that I could do something commercially with photography through that experience in the military. So I came out and got into undergraduate school from there.
Okay. Well, I will say thank you for your service. I know that that is a tremendous sacrifice, not only on yourself, but also your family. So thank you for your
I
service.
appreciate it. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
I guess going into the military, had you really done anything with photography prior to, just kind of poking around with cameras like you kind of mentioned at an early age?
Yeah, I didn't. No, I didn't really play. Your typical kid stuff, right? Polaroids, 35 millimeter. My family was big on 8 millimeter film. I got to get the floodlights out and load the 8 millimeter camera up and document all of our get-togethers and all that kind of stuff. But nothing as far as defining serious. No, it was all just exploration, fun. I thought every family did that. I was kind of surprised to find out when I go to my friend's house, they had one or two reels of 8 millimeter film and maybe one photo album of photographs, and I had pounds and pounds of photographs and reels of film at the house. So
Yeah.
it was a pastime for our family to watch 8 millimeter film and go through our photo albums. And my mother was really articulate about documenting everything on the what date and time and who's in the photograph and all that kind of stuff. So that was my early exposure prior to the military. Never really gave it much thought that way until after my experience in the Army.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's something that a lot of younger people of today really don't understand. Everybody has a camera with them at all times today, so you're constantly taking
Yeah,
photos and video, and
yeah,
it just wasn't like
yeah.
that.
No, it was a very you had to be purposeful, and it was something that you did as a deliberate act. And that's why when I say my parents were what I call active shutterbugs, they were very much embraced documenting family events, people year after year, get-togethers, all that kind of stuff. So that really set me up in a lot of ways for what happened later in my life. But no, I didn't. That was just all family and hobby stuff, and nothing serious that way as far as personal work or anything like that. No.
Sure. So you decided to go to college and pursue photography. So this is probably what, kind of late 80s time frame, I guess?
Yeah, 88, 89
Okay.
is when I entered undergraduate school. I did a 4 year degree at Weber State University in Ogden, Utah. The VA helped me out, all that kind of stuff, and I was able to do what's called a Bachelor of Integrated Studies degree. It's a three major degree. So I had photography, visual art, and communication as my three majors, and then I minored in Spanish. And
Yeah.
so I graduated in 1993 out of undergraduate school. And in undergraduate school is when I was first introduced to some of the historic processes. So I did albumin printing and things like that, in the early 90s. So that there again set me up for what was to happen a few years later when I took up wetplate and some of these other historic processes. So it was all kind of as I look back, it's interesting. I'm writing a book right now about a project that I'm doing here in the mountains about the Tabawachute tribe that was exterminated from here. But in that book, I'm writing kind of I would call it a mini autobiography. And as I went back through all of this over 30 plus years of doing this stuff, I could connect all the dots and why I had interests that I had from early on, even childhood, and then it carried over into getting into photography and then doing commercial work and doing photojournalism. And then finally, where I landed was my own personal fine art work and making my own, asking questions and telling my own stories and building narratives around questions that I was interested in. And so as I look back on it, I can see these stepping stones, these stairs, if you will, of how I guess I would maybe say ascended. Maybe it sounds a little egotistical, but how I ascended through my career in making art, using photography and making art. And a lot of that had to do with understanding some of these tools in photography. So in 91, 92, maybe, I was doing, I was making albumin prints, I was doing salt prints, I was cyanotypes, all these printing out processes that are still quite popular today. Worked in RA4, reversal stuff, Cibachrome, Ilfochrome, E6, C41, black and white. I did all of that. And so technically I was like on the money by 93. And none of these from 1839 all the way to 1993, none of these processes were foreign to me at all. So it really set me up for what I eventually would do. I didn't come out of undergraduate school wanting to work in historic processes. I came out of undergraduate school wanting to make a living, earn money.
Right, right.
And that doesn't a lot of times sit well with some of these alternative processes or historic processes. So I came out of undergraduate school working as a photojournalist. So I ended up working at newspapers and magazines and pursuing that. And I really loved that. I loved telling stories, although they weren't my own. I was assigned to go out. Sometimes I do feature photos and stuff like that, and I could hunt and do stuff like that on my own. But I loved doing, photo essays, double truck newspaper stuff back in the day, and going into the darkroom at the end of the day each day, soup and film, making prints, putting them on the AP spinner tube and getting them out there. And it was a lot. It was a great experience for a young guy, and I enjoyed it immensely. But then digital came along. I came into a newspaper I was working at one day, and they said, "Hey, Quinn, don't make any prints. You can soup your film, but we got this scanner over here in this Macintosh computer, and we're not making prints anymore." And I saw the writing on the wall at that time, and that's when I started looking toward. I'm more interested in telling my own stories. I'm more interested in pursuing what I call fine artwork, what I call my personal fine artwork. And it had really nothing to do with money. It didn't have anything to do with people telling me what to do commercially or any other way. And so, and the tools that I wanted to use were, film and printing and things like that. So that's really the first inkling I got of, hey, I'm gonna do my own thing here.
Yeah, and looking back, I'm sure it's kind of funny that, now that you're so focused in on some of the historical processes, but at the time during college and probably those first few years of your employment at the newspaper, those are all kind of considered archaic processes now. It's
100%. Yeah. I mean, that it would be, and nothing against digital at all, especially commercial work and all kinds of stuff, even fine artwork if you want to use it. But I just didn't have. I'm kind of. I'll be 60 years old next year, so I'm kind of from this old school class of people that I don't hang on to nostalgia for nostalgia's sake, but at the same time, there is something meaningful to me to work with your hands, to have skill and knowledge, and not rely on machines so much that way, right?
Right. Yep.
Now today we've got people are punching in prompts in artificial intelligent image generators, and they're doing so it's just going to progress, and it'll keep going, it'll keep moving on, and and it's right, that's a correct thing to do. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but there's a love and a connection that I have with the art of photography that these historic processes really fulfill. They're unique, they're handmade, they have all the Charles Baudelaire, a French poet, was railing against photography in the 1850s, when photography started really coming about, maybe even a little earlier. But moreover, with the Archer and his negative and printing, he said, photography, and he was comparing it to painting at the time.
Sure.
And he's saying,
Yep.
Photography can't be art, he said, because art must contain a piece of the man or woman's soul. And when I read that, I just felt like, that's true. There's something unique about the hand this idea of putting evidence that the human being made this, and to have a machine do everything for you, it starts, you could start an argument or have a debate about, is a human being really needed at some point? Couldn't it just be all automated and there's no human involvement at all? And I'm sure it will probably get to that point, to some degree. Writing is getting that way right now. But so for me, I had a real connection and still have a deep, deep connection to working with my hands, making mistakes, having failures, and then at the end of the day, seeing, holding an object in my hand that I made in the dark room. There's something very, very special about that. And I think we've lost the connection with the artifact, with actually holding a photograph, holding a
Yeah.
print, holding a plate, whatever it is you're doing. I think there's something missing there. And again, I don't mean to wax poetic here, but there is. We are humans. We need connection. We need context of what we're doing. We need to know that other people. We need to see the human imperfections to know that, there's the Japanese have this idea of, beauty in this imperfection, right? And that's, I think there's a lot of that can happen in these historic processes or these handmade processes where you're going to lack that, zeros and ones on a hard drive and Lightroom and Photoshop or whatever you're doing. I mean, and again, that's not in the pejorative. I don't mean to speak poorly about that. I'm just talking in the context of what I am passionate about and how I philosophically view the act of photography and what photography is to me, and what's lacking, what I found lacking very early on, 30 plus years ago, when I started to see it coming on in the commercial world, that just didn't sit well with me, and I just felt like it wasn't going to work for me. And I love my iPhone, and I have a digital camera, of course, and all that stuff, but I use it for very different reasons than
Sure. Yeah.
making work. But a lot of people make fine stuff with it, so I'm not. It's just me. It's not my jam.
Yeah. I know at some point we could probably have a whole episode on talking about AI and the revolution that's kind of taking place right now. And I really see kind of the next step is that everything is very much perfect at this point in a lot of these images. And I think the next big thing will be inserting the imperfection of humanity into these images. And maybe at that point they will look a little bit more realistic than what they do today. So, but I think it's coming quickly. So it's pretty amazing that really what's happened really just within the last 3 to 4 years, and really within the last 2 years, as more and more people have kind of gained access to the technology and being able to generate text and these images that are now kind of floating around. So it's definitely coming quickly. In the period of the 90s, so you're very familiar with some of these older processes, photographic processes, printing out processes. What event, and I think this was around Y2K for you, and that's the year 2000 for some of our younger listeners, that really got you into vintage photography in the form of wet plate? Had you really experimented with it any prior to that? I mean, what was your, I guess, introduction to wet plate before you really got into it?
So in undergraduate school, I was exposed, no pun intended, to all these processes. Very familiar with them, both how they were used, how to do them, all that kind of stuff. It wasn't very practical for me to pursue those at the time. So between 93 and the turn of the century, 2000, I worked as a photojournalist, as a photographer for newspapers, magazines, things like that. And I was becoming very disillusioned with photography in general. I wanted to pursue my own work. I wanted to tell my own stories. And I pulled this book. I have quite a large photo library of books, and I pulled this book down, The 100 Greatest Photographs from the Museum of Modern Art by John Zarkowski. And I opened that up and I was thumbing through it. They've got a daguerreotype in the front, and then a calotype, and then this little 6 plate, ninth plate, some small little, maybe quarter plate, some small little ambrotype full frame in there. And it just grabbed me, and all these memories came flooding back about the process. And there was just something aesthetically about that that just held me. And I thought, this is a process that I want to pursue. Can we do this thing? And so I started hunting around, and of course there were only two people out there at the time. I was pursuing this, and that was John Coffer and Mark Osterman.
Yep.
And so I contacted. I don't know if I contacted John. I talked to him later on, but I contacted Osterman and spoke to him, and I ended up going out to the George Eastman house and did I want to say 4 or 5 days out there. I can't. It's been so long now that I can't remember, but it was pretty basic. There was the biggest questions that I had were surrounding how to source the chemistry and things like that. But when I got back home, it took me several months to get set up, mix the chemistry, make the chemistry, do all that stuff, and I started getting successful plates and making ambrotypes, and I got into negatives early on as well too. But my primary goal was to learn how to make negatives to do albumin prints, because that's what I'd known, a few years prior to that, that I'd had experience with salt prints and negative albumin prints off of negatives. So it took me a while. I got kind of hooked on the ambrotype, like everybody does. You can go out there and see it today. You'll see everybody's kind of hooked on the ambrotype.
Right. Yep.
The quick Polaroid, the coming up in the fix, blah blah blah. And now they don't even, people don't even make their own ferrotype material. Back in the day, that's what you did. You baked your plates. And now people are just buying aluminum, and have for many years, and just buying collodion kits and pouring on aluminum and making these plates. So it's a quick and down and dirty thing today that most anyone can do. At the time, it was very special. I only knew 4 people in the country doing it, and I didn't know anybody in Europe doing it. And so it was a very small audience at the time. I opened up the Collodion forum, collodion.com, the Collodion forum board. Yeah, it was over 20 years ago now. And there was just a handful of people on it. There were Civil War reenactors, a couple of them that did collodion. They kind of shot me down. They said, why are you opening a forum board up for that? There's already one here, Civil War Reenactors Board. I said, well, I have a little bit different objective. I want to talk to people about this in the context of art. So sure enough, it wasn't long before we had a really great group of people on there. Probably 2004, 2005, we had a really great group of people on collodion.com, and it was a great board, and shared a lot of work, got a lot of ideas. And I started my first project around the turn of the century, and then in 2006 I had my first wet plate collodion exhibition. And that was at the Art Access Gallery. And Ruth Lubbard's, she was really, really great with me. Nobody had ever seen this stuff before. I had people coming from everywhere to check it out and doing demos and all that kind of stuff, which is kind of common today. But you gotta think about this. Back in the day, 20 plus years ago, this stuff was people didn't know what was going on with this stuff, right? They didn't.
Yeah.
They didn't understand what it was. And today it's a little different. You can't throw a stone very far and not hit a pop-up tintype studio or somebody doing, doing this stuff everywhere. So it's really saturated now. Back in the day, there was literally a handful of people doing it. So that's what got me going. After my first show, I moved to Europe, traveled all over, lived in Germany for 5 years, traveled all over Eastern and Western Europe, reintroducing this process, played a big role in bringing that back into Europe. And you can see what Europe's doing today. Did a lot of great fun stuff, collodion related. Went to Bièvre for the first time, the big photo fair. Mayor came and gave me a big award. I think that was 2009. I was doing portraits there. It's It's where Nadar took wet
Oh,
floating up in a hot air balloon and did
okay.
photos over
Yep.
Biev. And at that time, again, very very different, very very. You could go to Biev at the time, and there'd be table after table after table at large brass lenses for 100 or 200 euros. Dallmeyers and Voigtlanders and all kinds of stuff people crave today, and they were just out there. But the fair's been going on since 1964. But I was invited by a good friend out of Brussels. He says, "Have you ever been to Biev?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Oh, you got to pack up and come over and spend a couple of days there." So we went over. I got to meet Martin Becca, probably the world's best calotypist in Paris. Stay at his place, have dinner with him. So each year we went over there and did that, and it was a great. Europe was really a great experience. I got my first recognition in Reus, Spain. The governments that would get involved and bring me in, and they really appreciated stuff. They really saw the value in what I was doing. Joseph Ribas, a guy in Reus, he runs the photographic group of Reus, Spain. And it's a big group of people. And he set me up for a week to teach there and to do work for that city. Same thing happened in Barcelona. I ended up in Barcelona a lot teaching at the Alta Regalo studio there, and did images for the studio and the city, and taught, and just it was just a fantastic time. I mean, Europe will be always be my favorite. So I left America quite early after I got into collodion, and really collodion, my experience was in Europe. That's where
Yeah.
I ended up being, doing most of my work, doing, teaching a lot. I taught from Budapest to Glasgow to Barcelona, London, everywhere in Germany, Gothenburg, Sweden. I mean, everywhere. I taught everywhere in Europe for all those years, and it was amazing. It was absolutely life changing experience, and I think I feel good about people appreciated that I'd come and give and do all that, and the Europeans were absolutely showed a lot of gratitude, very kind and very very gracious people. I really enjoyed my time there.
Yeah, what an opportunity. I mean, to be around at the kind of the early days of this modern collodion explosion that we're kind of in the midst of now.
Oh,
Being
I like I said, there wasn't. When I got to Europe, there wasn't a person there doing collodion. I
Yeah.
mean, there just wasn't. I mean, so I got these great opportunities to introduce people to. I've had so many people contact me and talk to me about this change. I was going to give photography up. This changed my life in photography. I love it and appreciate it so much, and to be a part of that, I'm very grateful for that. I have a lot of great memories. Met wonderful people. Did all kinds of very. There's not enough time to go into how many experiences I had surrounding this process in Europe, in the many different cities and countries. I think I taught in 16 different countries, if I remember correctly
Yeah.
there.
So let me ask you this: what was it about this form of photography that you really thought would be pivotal to learn at that time in those early days to be able to push your body of work? I mean, what was it about the aesthetic, or
Right.
what really drew you into it?
Well, we'd go back to that, the idea of something handmade when the world was turning all digital, and even the film stuff. This was something that was so much slower, all large format. I mean, you can do it, any size you want, but this was traditionally large format, very slow, popping off one plate at a time. The failure rate was very high. So there was some risk of failure there, which really is exciting in a lot of ways.
Yep.
And so I knew just the aesthetic alone, using these 19th century lenses that have their own stories to tell, just full of memories and experience all their own. Popping lenses from the 1850s, 60s, and 70s and 80s. Just having that optic reborn into this, the 21st century, so to speak, and having these modern people. I was mainly a portrait photographer. Having these people having their images made with these optics, and just what it did with the natural light. And if you know how to light and use collodion and you understand its limitations, you can make some of the most beautiful portraits with those optics and the correct light. That process will just hand you absolute gold every time. Just stunning, amazing moving portraits if you know how to light them and use the right optic. The process will just step right up for you. It'll kill you if you don't know what you're doing, but
Yeah.
literally and metaphorically. But
Yeah.
but if you know what you're doing and you practice and you get good at it and you understand light and photography and optics, it will just give you the ultimate image in my mind, photographically speaking, in that context that any process can give you.
Yeah. Do you happen to remember your first plate that you took?
I have it. I
Okay.
have it. I show it in every exhibition. Yes, it's a photograph. You could probably find it online somewhere. It's a photograph of my hand covered in collodion and silver nitrate. I've had several people tell me it looks like the image from the anti-slavery mark on the guys he was branded on his hand. And it's just my arm. It's kind of cut off. It's not fixed very well, so it's got these kind of funky edges on it.
Yeah.
And it's an 8x10 clear glass ambrotype. But yeah, I still have that, and I put it in every exhibition of wet collodion that I've had, just as a marker or a staple of, to see where I've been and to see where I am or was at the time when I was showing the work. Yeah, I have
Yeah.
that.
Well, and I find it interesting that you started with 8x10 format
Yeah,
to start
yeah.
with too. So that's
Yeah, 8x10 is exactly what I started with. But again, you got to understand that I'd already been through these kind of formal training in photography. So I had an undergraduate degree in photography. So this stuff was not new, and I learned large format photography in undergraduate school. I processed every kind of film. E6. I was doing 8x10 Cibachromes and C41 and RA prints, and I was doing all of it, So this wasn't a huge step for me. I understood it technically. I understood what went into it. It wasn't a giant leap for me. It was just something that I had to, in my way, come around to understanding how to use it for what I wanted to do with it.
yeah. Let's talk about style. Do you find yourself, or whenever you were taking a lot of images, were you drawn to any particular subject matter?
Yes, my whole photography career since I started my own personal work has been concerning marginalized communities. And
Okay.
so I had my first large body of work was called Portraits from Madison Avenue, and that's about questioning. When I was a young boy, my father had these low income apartment complexes. I'd travel there with him at 8, 9, 10 years old, and I'd meet all these very fringe, marginalized people: amputees, drug addicts, prostitutes, drunkards, all kinds of people. And they were very kind to me. They had these little tiny rooms that they lived in. My father would go down and fix a plumbing problem or try to collect some rent from them or whatever. And I'd go with him, and I was exposed to all that. And the questions that I had were formed in my mind at that time about how people who are different are treated so poorly. And I had those questions my entire life, my entire career. So all my photography was based in that, was foundational to that. I had my first photographic show in 19, and I just wrote about this in my book. I had my first photographic show in I want to say 1992, and it was called Visions in Mortality. And if you read the statement on that work, it was all Polaroid color work. I did Polaroid transfers, and I wrote little poems with this, and it was about mortality. And I've had questions about how we deal with mortality. Human beings have this real paradox, this situation where we do everything we can to stay alive. We have this huge disinclination to die, and yet we have the knowledge that we're going to die. So we have this conflict, psychologically speaking. And what I've learned over the years is that this conflict, the knowledge that we're going to die and the desire to stay alive, drives so much of our behavior. And some of that behavior is how we treat other people, that are people who are different from us, how we treat people who are in the out group. So my photography's always been, although the first 25 years I didn't know, I couldn't articulate it completely, has always been about the psychology of othering, death anxiety, and marginalized communities, whatever they might be. When I was in Europe, I did a big project on the Shoah, the Holocaust. I did work on, the portraits from Madison Avenue here. I had a large exhibition in Paris in 2010 called Glass Memories. It was a combination of those two works, those two body of work. And there was a writer from a magazine or a newspaper that came in and did an excellent job. He got it, he understood it, and I started realizing other people had these questions. And now in the last few years, I started reading Ernest Becker and read his book, The Denial of Death. And I started understanding how psychologically, all the psychological underpinnings of human behavior, and this drive, the fear of the knowledge that we're going to die, although this is mostly unconscious, and people will say, I don't think about that, I don't understand that. Exactly, you don't, because psychologically, through evolution, we've developed these tools to repress that knowledge, but it's still in our unconscious, and we still act out. So if you're someone in an out group, you're not in my in group, and I'm reminded of death, or I walk by a graveyard, or I see something on the news, I'm going to look down on you more and ostracize you more than I would if I hadn't been reminded of my death. And we're constantly reminded about our death, whether we know it or not. So I got this understanding. I learned about how the psychology works. And so this final work that I'm doing now is about the Tabawatch Ute here that lived. I have 12 acres that I live on up here on the mountain. And this particular band, there was 12 bands of Ute Indian through Colorado and Utah. Tabawatch was one of them, the people of the Sun Mountain. And I sit in the shadow of the Sun Mountain here, a 14,000 foot mountain. And this was their land in the summertime. This is where they'd come to hunt and live in the summertime. And this project now called In the Shadow of Sun Mountain, and the subtitle is The Psychology of Othering and the Origins of Evil, is about all of this. My whole life story, how I came about this, how I learned about the psychological underpinnings, and answering the question, why the genocide in Europe? Why the genocide in Armenia? Why the genocide of the Native Americans? Why the mistreatment of people who are different from us? Why do we treat people who are different from us so terribly bad so much of the time? The discrimination, the racism. So all of this comes around now to me 30 some years later. And this book I'm doing now will be partly this wet collodion, dry collodion, calotype paper negatives, palladium prints, cyanotypes. There are photogenic drawings, tablotypes from plant material. So I've been photographing medicinal, Native American, the medicinal plants here that they use, the ceremonial plants, the landscapes, the objects. And now I've moved into using some RA4 color reversal prints. So I put a sheet of color paper in my holder and I make a direct color print from that, kind of like an ambrotype or tintype, but it's color. And so now I've moved in, and this summer, this will be my third year, or going on my third year that I've been working on this. But this summer, I'll photograph all the flora in color in this RA4 reversal process again. So the book will have a combination of all kinds of prints, color to palladium to all those things. But it will all be centered around and talking about the psychology of what happened here to the Native Americans here on their land.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like an amazing project to help, bring some light to those marginalized and really, people that have been overlooked for quite some time. They're just
Yeah,
not the typical subjects that you might see in portraiture.
yeah,
Um,
that's my goal. And people often ask me, they say, "God, when you're a portrait photographer, what? I mean, this is how I know you, you know." And you're right. That's what I've done for the majority of my photographic work is portraiture, and I loved it. I love it. But this is a different topic for me. So when we move into the Native Americans, it's a very delicate topic for me because the exploitation and the baggage that a white man would take into that, doing that, there's a lot of stuff to unpack there, and I don't want to exploit. I don't want to trivialize. I don't want to do the things that a lot of people through history have done photographically with Native Americans, photographing them. And I'm sensitive to that. I understand that. So I chose to do the flora, the fauna, the landscapes, the symbols, and the objects, and use those as ways, as a catalyst, and ways to talk about the events that transpired here, what happened here on this land, to whom it happened to the Tabawatch Ute that it happened to, and moreover, why it happened. Why did the European colonizers do this to the Native Americans here? And so I've chosen to esteem their land, esteem their medicinal plants, their ceremonial plants, their landscapes, these huge, beautiful rock formations that they speak highly of, and I chose to show that rather than going to Montrose or going to Ouray in eastern Utah or western Colorado and doing portraits and that kind of thing. I just didn't. I thought a lot about it, and I didn't want to put myself in a position of missing the mark with this work because you just said it. There's an opportunity here for the people that are interested in learning about this, the psychology, and this applies to all human behavior. I'm just using, because where I live has such a history of this, the same way I did in Germany has a history of that. I chose to, work on it from a standpoint of the psychology and art and blending these two disciplines together. So I'm using philosophy, psychology, art, history, theology, all kinds of disciplines to tell this story. And I think if I'm lucky and I can get it done, I think next year I'll be able to publish the book of this work and tell these stories and show these images of the land and the plants and the symbols and all kinds of things. So I think it'll be powerful.
nice, nice. Hey, let's switch over. We've kind of touched on this a little bit. How there are really an abundance of wet plate photographers that are kind of in this renaissance period of the process. That are
Yeah.
in kind of today's day and age. With the emphasis on social media content and acceptance that a lot of more, I guess, modern artists struggle with, what makes a wet plate image stand out today versus when you first got into the practice?
Yeah, that's a good question because what you're really asking about is uniqueness and awareness of individuality in artwork. And unfortunately, I'm no expert on this, I'm just, this is my lay opinion. What I see out there today is a lot the same, and a lot of it is technically poor. A lot of it is people don't really understand the process, or they don't understand light and optics. They don't understand the function of photography, and so you end up with a lot of the images that are the same. And I kind of, what I see is people trying to emulate whatever might be popular, right? So
Yeah.
it ends up being this kind of derivative copycat work. So and it's really so gear and technical focused. There's no concept focus. There's no talk philosophically, or what's the story, or why did you make this image, or none of that. It's like, what kind of collodion did you use, what lens did you use, what
Yeah.
format is that. It's all technical talk, because that's safe talk, right? That goes along with the aesthetic of the image. It's safe to talk about what kind of lens you use, and what kind of chemistry you use, and what kind of light you use, because then you don't have to defend that work. You don't have to justify why you made that portrait, or that landscape, or that still life, or that abstract, or whatever it is you're doing. So when you ask what makes a wet collodion image stand out, to me today, is a narrative, a true defendable narrative of work. I don't see very many people making work that is narrative based. That is something that they can present and defend, tell a story, and even if you don't like it, they're the ones controlling that, and they have the ideas. Even if you don't like the work, or you don't like the story, it's much better, and it has a much better chance of, I believe all artwork should be somewhat socially active. We make work to change people's minds, or throw ideas out there, or give them something to chew on or gnaw on. And so if you don't have something behind it that's conceptual, and there's context around it, and it's only technical, because that's the failure of so much photography. It's there's that barn again in the field, or that old pickup truck with grass growing through it.
Yeah.
There they are again and again and again, and that's great. If you're doing commercial work and somebody wants a piece for over their sofa, or over their whatever, that's fine. But if you're making fine artwork, if you're trying to express a concern, a question, a passion, a love, a hate, something that's in you that you've got to make and express through work, those kinds of things aren't going to get the job done. And I see just really an endless surplus of derivative work. And there's a lot of commercial stuff, which is a whole different category. People trying to make money with tintype studios, quote unquote, using aluminum and continuous lights or strobes. They don't even use the, natural light. They don't even use the materials of the process. So they're on a commercial bet. They want to get the $75 a plate or whatever. That's fine. If you can do that, that's a commercial venture. The problem with some of them, they're trying to blend it in as artwork. They're trying to say that this is art, and have a discussion about it, when there's nothing to say about a piece of work that you've made for commercially for money. You're making it for the consumer. You're making it for the commissioner, not for your own personal interest to talk about and tell a story with. So I get kind of hung up on this, because collodion isn't for everyone, although you can have the most technically inept, and the least trained, and the most ignorant, academically speaking, in photography person pour collodion on a plate, sensitize it, and get something on it, and people will be wowed. It's a very, very low bar for people to watch or observe if they've never seen something like that before. Now, if you raise the stakes and you say, I understand the chemistry, I understand photography, lighting, optics, I understand what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to achieve, and then I have this narrative behind all the work. Now now in my mind, now you're talking about making art. Now you're
Yeah.
talking about moving people and telling people a story. So long, short story long, a lot of people are copying each other. A lot of it's derivative. You see endless clips of plates coming up in fix. You see, endless overexposed portraits of people, endless, just on and on and on and on. There's so much going on that it just blurs for me. I don't know that I could name one person out there today, really, really pushing the boundaries in fine art work, personal work with wet collodion. I don't know that I could name it. I probably could if I thought about it long enough.
Yeah.
But
That's a great distinction, though, between just making the commonplace image that, anybody could do versus making something that truly speaks to the inner person and conveys something else other than what's
yeah,
just shown in the plate itself.
yeah, the concept, right?
Yeah.
So text out of context is a pretext. So you can present something and they can make anything up about it they want. But when you have concept, and I call it concept and craft, when you combine concept and craft, when you can combine the ideas with the technical, and you really have a strong story, that's what gets people. Could you imagine sitting down, trying to watch a movie or read a book, even more so, read a book that has no beginning, middle, or end, that has no character development, that has, that's the problem a lot of times that I have with photographers and some other artists in general. We're not held to those standards. Musicians have to play notes. They have to learn certain notes. They can't just bang on strings and put their finger somewhere on the fret, right? They randomly. Musicians have to be held accountable. Painters usually have to be held accountable. Filmmakers, writers can't just type any letter on the page and have it come out and be sensible. There's a certain level. We should be held to a higher standard. I think artists who use photography, and again, please don't include commercial work in this because this is completely different. But artists who use photography as their medium to communicate should hold themselves to a higher standard, both conceptually and technically. And if you want those artifacts, or if you want that blur, or if you want this or that, you're in control of that. It just didn't happen randomly. And the reason you when you talk about a distinction there, this kind of common average image, the bar is so low for people that have never seen this process. You can get a punch of adrenaline, the dopamine release, by showing somebody the plate that's just absolutely terrible, and they will just be giddy over it. And there you are, and you think you're doing so. It's reinforcing those poor behaviors, and nobody's being held to account because we really can't do that, right? We it's none of my business. People can do whatever they want. I do have my opinions, and I do understand. I have an undergraduate degree in photography, and I did a Master of Fine Arts degree in historic processes. So I have a certain academic level and an experiential level to talk about this in a certain way that your average guy that bought a collodion kit and bought some aluminum and got a 4x5 camera, and now he has a pop-up studio making photographs and thinking that they're doing God's work. It's just a different. It's probably out of context to talk about this on this show because most of your listeners will probably be more interested in hearing about the superficial, like the lenses and the plate sizes and the this and the that. I'm less interested in the technical, and I'm more interested in the conceptual. And if your technical supports your conceptual, I'm very interested in it. If your images support your ideas and not the other way around, if you're a process photographer, I'm less interested in you. Rather, if you're an art photographer, if you've got ideas, questions, concerns that you're trying to express through the process, I'm more interested in that. I'm less interested in process photography. Most anyone, I've taught very young people. My daughter did this I think she was, 10 years old. Anyone can do this process relatively well if they spend any time on it too. But I'm more interested in people using this as a tool, not as a banner to hold up to say, well, I'm good because I use this process. That doesn't really qualify for me that way. That's kind of a cop out, but it works for a lot of people because so few people, relatively speaking, there's a lot of doing it, but so few people in the public have ever seen it. There's not a day goes by that I don't get an email. Well, maybe a day or two, but I get a couple a week that somebody somewhere has got a newspaper article, and the way the newspaper writes it up, it's like this has never been done before. It's just over and over again. Yeah. So it tells me there's a wide audience for it out there. So it's not going to stop anytime soon. I would encourage people working in these processes to consider why they're working in them, what they're trying to do with them. And if you're a commercial person, great. No problem. I am not coming down on commercial work at all. I'm just saying be distinct about that. Don't try to muddy the waters over in people's work that's personal narratives and they're trying, just stay commercial. Say, I'm a commercial photographer. I use this process because people come in and get their tintypes done for $75 and I make money on it. Great. That's terrific. But if you're a person that wants to express an idea or have a concern or want to make work to move people or tell people about something in a certain way, I would say throw a pebble in their shoe, make them think about something. Consider what you're doing and how you're approaching it and why you're using this medium or why you're choosing that size of format or this particular lens or whatever this particular variant of the process or whatever you're doing. Think about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and not be a process photographer, but be an art photographer. It was quite long ago, probably 10 years, I started hearing this, that galleries started refusing wet plate work, in serious galleries because it was becoming so popular. And so they started kind of rejecting it right off the bat because there wasn't a lot of substance already then going into it. So people need to treat this like any discipline. Just because this is easier to do doesn't necessarily mean it's best to approach it that way. And those are my personal feelings. I'm not trying to, say that this is gospel. These are just my opinions.
No, I think those are great points. I mean, I think there are a lot of us that we're really drawn to this process because of it is almost like performing a magic trick, right? And for people
yes.
that have never seen the magic trick before, they are generally amazed with the process. So.
And you get a big dopamine hit off of that, Chad. And I get it. I understand it. I've been there. I get that.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is that as you continue to do that, what you're missing there is you're going off the self-esteem, bolstering your self-esteem and getting that dopamine hit versus making work that's important right. or valid or that will be lasting or that will be interesting to look at in 5 years or 50 years or 100 years if we last that long.
Right.
But those are the ideas. I mean, and I'm speaking from an artist, not a technician, not a commercial person, none of that.
Yeah. Okay. So based on this conversation, I almost hate to ask these next few questions, but I think some of our audience are generally interested in this kind of stuff. So Quinn, what kind of photographic gear do you typically use for wet plate portraiture?
I've been a long time fan of the Chamonix cameras.
Okay.
I know the owner. I went to China. The China Art Academy invited me to China a few years ago, and I taught at the academy there. Their professors, and I hung out in Hangzhou with Chamonix. Provided me that's where their factory is. That's where they have 12 or 15 people working there that make these cameras. And so I use a Chamonix and have for a very long time. I've had from 20 by 24, 1620. 10 by 10, 8 by 8, all the way down, whole plate. I've had pretty much all their cameras, and today I'm down to one Chamonix 10 by 10 camera with their wet collodion, dry collodion backs. I use them for both, and I even use them for my color prints as well too. They're just great. I have several backs that I use. The optics that I use, I've collected lenses over the years. I've been collecting lenses for 20 years, I guess now, and my favorites are my DeRogi. I have a very fast 9-inch DeRogi that's probably just a smidge under f3, probably f2.8, f2.9.
Okay.
One of the fastest of the 19th century, 1864. I have the classic Dallmeyer 3B that I like because I can stop that down. I have all the Waterhouse stops with that. I have a smaller DeRogi, a Fab 2 portrait lens, which is super nice. That's an f4 lens. And then I have some other more modern lenses. I have a couple other older brass lenses, kind of no names, but I have some modern lenses that I use too. Not very often, but this work that I'm doing now, and if you go to studioq.com, you'll see on my blog, all of that color work is done with my DeRogi or my Dallmeyer lens. And so you can see this 19th century effect in color, which is really stunning and beautiful in person. They look like paintings. So I really love those optics. I shoot them wide open most of the time. Other than some landscapes, I'll stop down to 3B and use that. But I normally work in whole plate sizes. That's whole plate and half plate are my favorite formats to work in. And I'm making 10 by 10, 10 inch by 10 inch direct color prints in my Chamonix using those old lenses.
Nice. Okay. Very nice. So you've kind of thinned out your collection, it sounds like.
I have. We moved up here 3 years ago, and so 2 years prior to that, I got rid of several cameras and probably 15 lenses. I slimmed down, and now I'll probably even do that again to where I'm just down to maybe one or two lenses, and just I don't know what's going to happen after this project and book, but I'll see. I just less is more as I become older. I'm just thinking down the road that I just want to slim down. I don't even know what I'm going to do. This could be my last photo project. It might not be. I might. Who knows? I don't know. I'm just saying that I only work one project at a time, and it's usually for several years. And I usually hone in on one or two pieces of equipment to do that work consistently through the entire project. So, and that's where I'm at now. I will only use two maybe the third lens, the third DeRogi on this. There'll be three lenses and those variants that I'm using for this project in that one camera. So I hone in on what I want for reasons that I could explain, but I have reasons for why I choose those aesthetically and conceptually, and then I just stick with that. And my projects usually run 2 to 5 or 6 years, depending on what I'm doing.
Great. All right, let's spend a couple of minutes and talk about a photographer that probably very few people outside of the collodion world really recognize his name, but it's amazing that he gave this gift to all of us of photography. I'm talking about Frederick Scott Archer.
Yeah,
Developed the process in kind of the late 1840s, published some work in, I think, 1851 in a scientific periodical talking about the collodion process. What drew you to really get a memorial set up for Mr. Archer there in, I think, just outside of London where he's buried? You had done that effort a few years back. Tell us what really inspired you to get involved with that and lead that up.
Yeah, that was 13 years ago. He is buried in Kensal Green in London. It's London proper, actually. You're right. He worked on along with and Gustave Le Gray. The French would say Gustave Le Gray invented the collodion process, and they're probably right. Archer read a lot of his letters, and Gustave Le Gray became disinterested when he started doing the wax paper calotypes and kind of left collodion behind. And that was in the late 1840s. Archer did publish the first working recipe in The Chemist in 1851. That's officially when it's recognized as a process, March of 51. I became interested in, I had a lot of people, I'd been to London, I'd had a lot of people inquiring about it, asking, is there anything that we could do? There was just a lot of people that, after I'd taught for a while there, this happened in 2010. I arrived in 2006 in Europe. I'd taught a lot. I'd had a lot of people interested in doing something as a community. And so I kind of took up the reins and I think we had 13 countries and 50 some photographers represented in that wet collodion book that we did on Wetplate Day for Archer's Memorial. And I hired an artist in London to do that granite plaque. He put a tailboard camera on it. You can read on it what it says here. Frederick Scott Archer, 1813 to 1857, inventor of the wet collodion process, and there's a tailboard camera engraved on there. In fact, I have that camera tattooed on my arm as we speak here. But what moved me mostly is he provided, number one, unlike Talbot and even Daguerre was money hungry. They all were. They were scientists, right? They weren't really photographers or artists. They were commercial oriented, and fine, that's no problem. But unlike Talbot, who really was after money for his calotype process, Archer didn't pursue any of that. He gave the process to the world for nothing, no copyrights, no nothing. And this process changed my life in so many ways, profoundly, probably in ways that would probably never happen to people nowadays because, being the first people in it, things really, you got the first look at everything. You saw everything progress. You could see all that stuff. And it was just a culmination of everything. And so there I was in Europe, people asking about it. So we put together, a couple of blokes in the UK and I kind of spearheaded it, got 13 people in 13 countries, mostly in Europe, some in America though, that were working the process to donate plates. We had a show in the Dissenters Gallery at Kensal Green Cemetery where he's buried. I did a demo, we did a speech, we did an unveiling of the placard. The BBC came over, did a little piece on it and stuff, but I was really disappointed that Royal Photographic Society paid no attention. That's their man right there, right? He gave the world photography to my mind. Yeah. And they didn't show up. So I was a little bummed about that. But we had a great turnout. There was a handful of people there that came to watch it. And now it's there forever, and it just honors him. He was in a grave that didn't say anything about, he's buried on top of his sisters, and they stacked him up back in the day. So he's just stacked in there, his body's stacked in there with a bunch of other people, his family members. And it just didn't say anything about who he was or what he gave the world. So we collectively wanted to change that and give back, pay tribute, and honor him. Mark Zimmerman ran it. He said, what do you think about, they have the Worldwide Pinhole Day. What do you think about having a wet plate day? I said, yeah, let's go for it. So he kind of got the ball rolling on that. We started that, shortly, right around the time we were doing this. And so we just wanted, looking back, people ask me this all the time. Do you ever regret teaching so many people this process? I have mixed emotions about it. No, I would answer no immediately. But I've quit teaching. I don't do demonstrations. I don't do any of that stuff anymore. I don't write technical books anymore. I don't do any of that. Simply for the fact that the market's saturated. I have no interest in it. And I think we should probably take a moratorium a little bit on it so it doesn't turn into something that it looks like it's turning into right now. Yeah. But Archer was such a huge influence that there was no way I could be living in Europe and not have, and teaching this process everywhere, having people asking me about it, and not have contact that gallery. And I had a great guy to work with the gallery there that he was just amazing, that helped us do everything. And that artist that did his placard was just amazing. And the event went well, and it was a feel good moment. It wasn't just me; it was a lot of people, but it was a great thing to do. And I think to honor a person like that is the right thing to do.
Yeah, I appreciate that you and the other folks that went through that effort to make sure that Archer was recognized, and people are able to go to that place and at least pay some homage to him and what it's done for them and their creative efforts. I think it's a great thing. So
Yeah, I do too. And now every time, if you're in Kensal Green Cemetery in London and you walk by that gravesite, there's no doubt that you'll look down, even if you don't know who he was, or if you don't know what collodion photography is, you'll at least see that he's the inventor of that process,
right.
And that was the main thing. It wasn't a pauper's grave necessarily, but it wasn't necessary. It was unmarked in the sense of what he gave the world. And if you think about it, what he gave the world, Talbot gave the positive negative, no doubt about it. But that was on paper. Archer gave the positive negative on glass. So these sharp, he gave the world what we'd consider today photography, film photography, right? Yeah. He started that, and he gave it to the world. He didn't ask anything in return for it, And he died in 1857. He died of liver disease. So he probably had massive exposure to ether over the years, and so yeah, he I don't want to say he gave his life, but he probably, in reality, probably did.
Probably did, yeah. All right. Well, Quinn, I want to thank you for being on the show today. It's been a great conversation about modern collodion and how you've really impacted this process, not only here in the U.S., but within Europe as well. What is the best way for people to reach out to you, maybe to see your work? I know you still do hosting of some live shows on YouTube. What's the best way for folks to look you up?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me, Chad. It was fun to kind of rant and throw some things out there. And like I said, probably some of it won't be interesting to some of your audience, but some people might get something out of it. But I appreciate you having me.
It's a challenge to everyone.
Yeah, it is. The best way to do it is my website, studioq.com. I do have youtube.com/Quinn Jacobson. I'm reading a book up there now, ironically enough, called The Worm at the Core, reading the 10th chapter of 11. Next week, we're finishing the book up. I have a small audience interested in that. That all deals with the project that I'm working on now. So if you are interested in seeing how I put a project together or how I work, I do document a lot of this. I do talk a lot about this. I flesh out these ideas, and I put it all on my blog, and you're welcome to go see that. And like I said, I don't do workshop. I get emails once in a while, not so much anymore, but every once in a while about workshops and demonstrations. I just got some the other day, but I don't do those anymore. Just I'm working on my own work full time doing this project, and hopefully maybe next year you'll see the fruits of that labor. And I think I'm really excited about the book. So if you're interested in that and you want to stay tuned at studioq.com, that's where my stuff is. So
perfect. And I think we also need to mention that your guidebook, Chemical Pictures, is probably in the top 3 modern guidebooks for people that want to read and actually learn how to execute this process. So
yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that. Yes, Chemical Pictures is in its I first published it was called the Wetplate Collodion Experience in 2006 for my graduate degree, my MFA that I did. There was some of it was technical that I worked on. So I published the first book in 2006. Then I came out with Chemical Pictures in 2012. And I've had 3 iterations, and the latest and last one is the complete Chemical Pictures book, published in 2020, and it comes with a high-def video workshop guide and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, if you're interested in the technical stuff, Again, you probably think I hate the technical stuff listening to me. I don't. I love it. I've devoted a massive amount of time of my life to it, and it's great to learn. It's great to learn to be safe, to make the best pictures you can make, and to learn how the chemistry works. Those are my big things, and I cover positives, negatives, and pot printing in this newest book. So it's all there, all the variants, all that stuff. So yeah, if you're interested, absolutely. I think you can get anywhere in the world. You can get it on Amazon, and people still pick it up all the time. It goes. So I appreciate that.
That's great. Hey, thanks, Quinn.
Thank you, Chad.
Yeah, thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode and maybe even picked up some insights that will help you along in your own wet plate journey. I'd love to hear from you on who you'd like to have on in a future episode. So send me a message and follow our Instagram account at 10 questions with any feedback. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast provider. Thanks for listening to me, Chad Shryock, and my expert guests, and I look forward to you joining me again in the coming weeks for a new episode of 10 Questions.